this evening, and welcome also to our people who are watching by live streaming. We always try to keep you in mind so that we can not bypass you during the presentation. A couple or a few announcements, but please let me start off with what I always manage to forget, which is may we all rise, please. Say the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'll lead this time. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Just a few announcements about who we have coming up on the schedule. At the April meeting, we'll have Andrew Beckwith from, help me.
Mass Resistance.
What's that?
Mass Resistance.
Mass Resistance.
Mass family.
Mass family. We don't have a topic yet for these, but you can always go to our website, wtpocc.org, and we'll have announcements on the topic or the title of the presentation for that month. In May, we have Ron Smith, who's from Mass Maritime Academy, coming to speak with us. And in June, we're lining up the details of this, but Mark Meckel from the Convention of States, do I have that right?
Meckler, yeah.
Meckler, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm a little flustered tonight. I've been running around after the 3-hour trip from Hampton, New Hampshire today. So let's see, what else do we have? There is a petition on the table over there, and we're not a political organization. So I'm just going to invite you. It's a civic duty or a civic service that we're performing there to wander over at the end and take a look and see if it's something that you might be interested in to support your community in the world of civics, not of politics. And I just also want to announce that after Dr. Jaley speaks tonight, if you'll hang around for just a few minutes, he would like to show a presentation, YouTube presentation, about 4 minutes, right? On the American pilgrimage.
American Pilgrimage 400.
Thank
It's
you.
coming up next year.
Right. So that's the 400th anniversary that Paul was intimately involved with, and should be interesting. So please hang on for just a few minutes. All right. So I'm going to make the introduction brief because Paul has spoken to the group a number of times before, and most of you in the room know Dr. Paul Jaley. He's a good friend and a scholar, a historian, an author, principal of an outstanding school, the New Testament school in Plymouth. I've been to that school. I've seen the students in action. I've entered their classrooms. And let me tell you, it's a remarkable thing. It's a remarkable thing. When I went there that one particular day to address your class, it made me proud to be there in front of those kids who are being taught civics, being taught American history, being taught about the U.S. Constitution. So without further ado, Paul is going to talk to us about the impact that Pilgrim government had on our own founding documents and our own founding in the United States of America. So, Paul, thank you very much.
Well, great. Good to be back here. Been a little bit of a while, but and I'm not far away. I didn't have to go 3 hours, so that's good. But good to be back with you, and I'm going to look at this topic. And sometimes, if you look at history as fragmented, non-related events, you'd say, "What did the Pilgrims have to do with the Constitution?" My gosh, they're 175 years removed from that time period, so they must have had no effect. Well, that's unfortunate because that's the way we've been taught history, that there's no ideological connection, generation to generation, but that's not the case. The unique ideas brought by the Pilgrims on board the Mayflower, I often say this statement, I'm a tour guide in Plymouth, but I also am an historian and teach on this. I think it's pervasive enough for where we are in America today, that's why we're calling all Americans back to America's hometown next year for the 400th anniversary. Why? Because what you learn about the Pilgrims is massively important today. We have to remember. So when we look at it, we can say the Pilgrim roots of America's constitutional liberty, we need to connect the dots. And that's one aspect about history that is very important to be able to do. And really, we have to find out what are the roots of the Pilgrim story. The Pilgrim story, they were children of the Reformation. and converted Christians from the Reformation. The Reformation is this massive revival that takes place in the 1500s, goes all the way back, however, to 890. We can see the roots of it in 890. John Wycliffe, 1300s, and Luther and Calvin, just key individuals. But these individuals laid the foundation of what we call Western civilization. I don't have to tell you this, but if you go to the average college today, the Western Civ courses, which we used to call them, Western Civ, have been completely renovated. In most colleges, they don't even exist anymore. And Western civilization, you were supposed to have a course in Western civilization, so you knew what were the unique ideas that founded Western civilization, what makes it different from the ideas that established other places. People aren't better in the West than they are in the East, or the North or the South. It's not people, it's not culture, it's not skin color. It's ideas. Some ideas produce liberty, some ideas produce slavery. So we got to know which ideas produce what. And we can look at that and say, what seed produces what fruit? If we learn to discern the seed, we can predict the fruit. Or another way we can do it is say this. When the United States Declaration of Independence was formed, and the Constitution of the United States, there are only a certain amount of ideas that could ever have produced those. So we could go back. We could go by deductive reasoning. I teach logic, elocution, rhetoric, debate at the school. And so we teach students to say, if you take a look at this Constitution, a decentralized, bottom-up Constitution that has the rule of law, unalienable rights, and all those things, that's so unique a document. You don't find it anywhere else coming up in the world except it being copied in Central and South America 30 years afterwards. It's taken all over the place, but it comes from America. We'd have to ask this, what would ever birth that kind of fruit? Well, it's the root that produces the fruit. And so we have to go back and say, what was it? And I can tell you that the roots of Western civilization were the roots of the Pilgrim story. First, King Alfred. Look at this. This is a common, this goes probably for about 700 years. You get St. Patrick. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. That would be a great diversion for me to jump into this history of St. Patrick. But the point is, it's been lost today. And St. Patrick is the one who went to the British Isles and Ireland and that area, and all he did was win about 300,000 people to Christ and plant about 100,000 churches, thousands and thousands of churches all across the mainland. It so transformed the area that he left a book in every hamlet called the Liber ex lege Moysi. In Latin, liberty from the law of Moses, and the Ten Commandments. That the Ten Commandments were the basis of a free society. Imagine that. And St. Patrick and King Alfred picked that up and made it the common law. Well, what's the common law? It means the law common to both leader and citizen. Can you imagine a society where the leaders follow the same laws as the citizens? That was our birthright. That's what made America so unique. Why did so many people want to come to America the first 50 years after the Constitution? It was the immigration destination of the world. People wanted to come in. Why did they want to come here? Because the same law that governed the citizen governed the person who was in office. In fact, in America, you were called a public servant, and you gave up certain privileges in order to serve the public who had all the privileges and the rights. You gave up some when you went into office. Now, I'm not telling you that's the idea today. The idea today is you get elected into office, you become privileged, and you don't have to follow all the laws and the rules others have to. But that's not the way it was. That goes all the way back to King Alfred in England. It's our heritage, the common law. And the common law sits directly on the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments sit directly on negative law. That means that negative law simply means that the citizen has all the liberty and they delegate a little authority to government. That comes from the Ten Commandments. So now we go and say, well, what about John Wycliffe? He translates the Bible into English. Well, what does that have to do with the Pilgrims? Well, first of all, the Pilgrims are going to have an English Bible. That's what's going to be the cause of their conversion. It's John Wycliffe that said, the Bible should be the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. See, Lincoln borrowed that. And he borrowed it from Wycliffe. This was critical spiritual liberty for the Pilgrims. Martin Luther, the fact that the individual conscience is to be protected. That a true society would protect the rights of conscience. Think about it. That, as James Madison said, the religious liberty, your religious ideas are so precious, they cannot be taken away. You cannot be forced to go against your religious convictions. The idea of civil liberty, not just religious liberty, but civil liberty. John Calvin. The idea that you should have civil liberty. Calvin, in grade school, through the Civil War, we were taught in America that Calvin was the father of American liberty. That's what it was taught. That Luther was the founder of religious liberty. That Wycliffe is what gave us the Bible in English, where we could understand it. And King Alfred was the founder of the common law. I'm not saying that's what's taught today. Now, if you come to my school and sit in my history class, and I have a graduate from the school here, so you can ask her, but she cannot tell any stories about me. Well, listen to this. Some people, they go to the Constitution and they say, well, what religious roots would there be in the Constitution anyway? Well, here's just a sample. Let's go through it really quickly. In the Constitution, it says that Sunday has to be honored. Article 1, Section 7 says that the Congress shall meet, but Sundays excepted is the clause. So, by the way, you study the last 5 to 8 years, there's a lot of bills that are not too good for liberty that have been passed on Sunday. I think that's a violation of the Constitution. But that, of course, comes from the fifth command of the Bible, such a biblical concept that Sundays would be accepted. The 10 days that the president has to sign a bill or veto it, it's Sundays accepted. So he actually has 11. The currency, the fact that with the Constitution is to coin money. The Constitution is not to print money, but coin money. And where does that come? Well, Proverbs 11:1 makes it very clear. You make sure that there's no dross in your silver or gold, that it is a pure base. No standing army, the Constitution says, in peacetime. So that comes right out of Deuteronomy 17:16. No standing army. The fact that a president must be a natural-born leader, must have been born in the nation to be a leader. Well, that's Deuteronomy 17:50, drawn directly out of it. The fact that there's appellate justice, Article 3, that all justice comes from the bottom up, that it's done locally first. You can't solve it locally, then you appeal it. The idea is we say appellate courts are not common throughout the world. Appellate courts are uniquely American, but they're really uniquely Jewish. But they come from the Old Testament. Judges, the judge's term. See, in here, don't make a mistake. So many people do this. Someone said to me and said, well, we got to change the Constitution. I said, everybody's talking about changing the Constitution. Why do you want to change it? And they said, I want to change it because I can't understand the founders. They put judges in for life. I said, when's the last time you read the Constitution? They said, well, I don't know. It never says judges are in for life. Never is that phrase in the Constitution. Then they say, huh? They're in during good behavior. So what's good behavior? Not violating the oath. Actually, the first 50 years, there were judges impeached because they were found in a tavern drinking too much. That would misguide their judgment. They were not good citizens. They weren't morally upright. I dare say, if we went to the original context, how many judges would be left? But the idea is law and equity. The fact that you have law and you apply it equitably, that you get the punishment that fits the crime. And to understand that's very unique. That comes out of Deuteronomy 4:1. Or justice is local. The best justice is local. Article 4, and of course Deuteronomy 21. So most people are ignorant when they read the Constitution. They don't know where those ideas came from. And actually, as one professor put it, I like this idea, the Constitution does not have roots in Athens. It has roots in Jerusalem. Great phrase. Now, so what about self-government? You see, the Bible, Bradford says this, what is by the travail, diligence, godly, zealous preachers, God's blessing. Then they became enlightened by the word of God. So pilgrims were these individuals that were getting converted by the word of God and the preaching. And spiritual liberty meant this, in conversion. And conversion is a change of heart from the inside out. That is the theological root for individual representation. In other words, I govern myself, and then I elect other people whose qualification is I only elect people who govern themselves. And they then, by my consent, speak for me in the legislature. The idea of individual representation is rooted in the idea of self-government, which is rooted in the idea of conversion. It means simply this. You're converted from the inside out. The heart changes. If you try to convert someone from the outside in, you're forcing them into conformity. Most people don't react too well to that. That's understandable. But it's voluntary. The heart can change. You have to realize the idea of individual representation, which is a constitutional principle, has a theological root. And what were the first people who came to America with that root? The Pilgrims. The amazing thing, Christ's government rules behavior from within. In other words, if I am controlling from within, I'm much better at controlling my behavior when it's from within than from without. When I do it this way with students, I say, look, if you don't control yourself, you are asking me to control you. I will oblige. I will help you when you desperately cry unto me for help. And then when I do that, the student said, when did I ask you? It's very obvious. When you do not control yourself. And that's the way it is. Now listen, that means this principle. The American people today actually have a better government than they deserve. Because the way we're acting, we deserve totalitarianism. We are acting in entitlement, we're acting as victims, we're acting like every time there's a problem. Come on, think with me. I'm in the legislature, I'm an advisor, I deal with it. I've advised on several occasions state legislatures across America where I come in, teach their constitution, and they ask me questions on what the constitutional way to deal with a runaway court or whatever it is, and I use the constitution of the state I'm in, and I speak to them. Over and over and over again, it's obvious that the trend today at the state and the federal level, whenever there's a problem, we need more government. That's the bottom line. What that says is we want less self-government. If you have more external government, it means you have less internal government. You want less external government? Then increase internal government. Instead of going to your town and asking your town to do it, go to your neighbors, start a movement from the bottom up and do it, and then say, look, we just saved the town money. A lot of towns don't want to have money saved. But the point is, we have to increase self-government. That's going to come neighbor to neighbor. Individuals have capacity to select those who will rule over them. Individuals, but we're getting the government we resemble, aren't we, today? Because someone said, oh no, I'm not getting the government I resemble. You kidding me? I said, me. I don't vote. You're getting the government you resemble. They said, no, I'm not getting anything. I refuse to participate. I said, well, your refusal to participate is a vacuum that demands being filled by somebody else. So, sorry, I'm not trying to throw this thing. But the point is, no, that's not true. There's a capacity here. Would this shock you? That in the first years of our republic in colonial America, most towns, now get ready, fasten your seatbelt, most towns had a 100% participation rate on election day. I said that.
Oh, Paul, now they have
100%.
120%.
The what?
Now they have 100%.
No, yes. Yes, and then the actual registered voters are less than 40%. But the point is though, that's phenomenal. When you think about the history of election day in America was close to 100%. Now it's true, not every individual voted in the town, but everybody came together. Actually, election day was started with a parade. For years, it was a holiday. Started the parade, the clergy led the parade. They had the public officials behind them. This is election day. And you know what they did? They made a parade down the green of the town to the local church. And everybody running for office sat in the first 2 rows, and by rotation, the clergy preached that for 2 hours and told them what a good magistrate would be. If you dare steal power from the people, God's going to get you. Read the sermons. That's amazing. I'm waiting for that day.
Yeah.
Not because of anger, but because of dealing with it. The democratic choice under the rule of law. So, jurisdictional separation of church and state. Here's another thought. That religious liberty is the separation of church and state. But I always say jurisdictional separation of church and state. Because what does it mean, separation of church and state today? What's the first thing people say? Separating God from government, right? Yeah. Well, you're a clergyman. You should have nothing to say about government. I said, well, it's too late. I have a big mouth, and I've been saying things for years about government because that's what I've studied. But the point is, you look at this, you could say, what do you mean jurisdictional separation? Well, you see, they saw freedom of religion was in Holland. And they went there because William Brewster had found that freedom of religion was there. King James was harrying them out of the land. And King James gave an alternative. You must worship in the state church, or I'll ban you. But I'm not letting you leave. So he shut up all the ports. He put spies everywhere. So you can't leave and you can't stay. That's a great choice. Notice what it is either you do what I say, or I'm going to persecute you. I'm going to send the civil magistrate after you. There was also a law, 1584, which was very clear in England, that said the following. You are minding your own business in your home. There you are. And you notice that your next door neighbors are not going to church with you. Because remember, you were assigned a church based on 50 miles from where you were born. That was the parish concept. Everybody was automatically a member of the church the moment you're born, you're christened, you're baptized, you're automatically enrolled in that church. So when you don't show up, it's easy attendance. We know when you're not there. And if a neighbor knows that their other neighbors did not go to the established church, they found out they're sick, that's fine. But then they found out, no, they went to a house. They went to an underground church. If you did not report them, and it's found out you knew, you get the punishment they would get. So what does that do to the neighbors? It makes force to turn in their neighbors, right? There's no liberty there. There's no religious liberty there. So they go to Holland. And when they go to Holland, they go to Scrooby. And here they make a covenant, a religious covenant for their church. They voluntarily say, John Robinson, when he led them in this, and this is just the front side of the old Scrooby Manor. Okay? And that's why you were there. Yeah. All right, the old Scrooby Manor here. Listen, when they made that, just to understand how radical this is. They studied the scripture and they said, wait a minute, we've been told that the bishops are the ones that on the top that create the church. That the church is subservient to the bishops. Wait a minute, that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says if 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, that is a church. So the Pilgrim said, no, the church starts from the bottom up. John Robinson put it this way. He said, my gosh, that's not the case. When I became a pastor, this is Robinson writing now to the English authorities, which is why he's going to be John Robinson, the runner, because he's going to have to run away from these authorities. But he says the following: when I became a pastor, I took a step down. He said, I actually washed the feet of kings. Oh, I love that. I washed the feet of kings because the saints in my church have a higher office than I do. I am now called to wash the feet of saints and wash the feet of kings. I'm taking a step down. The bishopric hated him because he was turning government how? On its head. They said, no, the centralized power, we're always corrupt, and you serve at our bidding. Robinson knows that I serve at their bidding. It's consent of the government. You see where it comes from. It wasn't invented by Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was asked, where'd you get these ideas for the Declaration of Independence? You know what he said? They've been preaching in the pulpits of America for generations. It was nothing but the consensus of the American mind. There were no new ideas in it. So in other words, it was practiced at the common level for years, for decades. And it was just put into the American mind. What a powerful way to think of the Declaration. But it was nothing was invented there. As the Lord's free people, we joined ourselves by a covenant into a church estate in the fellowship of the gospel, to walk in all his ways, made known, be made known. whatsoever it should cost them, Bradford says. Well, here's the interesting thing. The bishopric didn't like it, but the civil realm didn't like it either. Now, remember, here's a cardinal truth. You can take it to the bank because it's historically proven that whatever the church incorporates, the state and society will reflect. Maybe one or two generations later. So the civil government was not happy with Robinson either, because what the Pilgrims did, see, all it takes is a small group of people who's a remnant, they're persecuted, they flee to Holland, but they govern themselves. It immediately starts inspiring other people. People don't know anybody can govern themselves. They think everything's built on a king from the top. Robinson said, no, you're using a pagan kingdom. He said, the pagan kingdoms have the kings at the top live in luxury, they live in corruption, they have all the money, and the peons beneath pay their salary, and they're supposed to shut up and pay more every year. Robinson says, no, God did it the other way. The kingdom of God in Christianity means the king comes inside the subject, lives in the subject, it's completely bottom up. That's radical talk. And that's what the Pilgrims talk like. That's the amazing thing. I said one time, I was doing a little tour near the Mayflower, being filmed actually on the Mayflower in Plymouth, and I said this. I said, now here's the cargo hold. My brother's got the video, he's going down the cargo hold. And I said, but the most precious cargo brought on the Mayflower were the ideas of self-government in the hearts of the Pilgrims. That was more valuable. Because look what it's done. It's given us this. Notice the following too. They pushed back, the Pilgrims did, against the prevailing concept. See, the prevailing concept was, all right, just follow me. Now you have a king. He owns everything. He's sovereign even over the land. That's not the history of England was allodial land ownership. Now, if you can take Webster's 1828 dictionary, or you look it up online, you'll find allodial land ownership means real title to land that can never be taken away for all of your inheritance from every generation. Feudal land ownership is land that you own by permission of the state. The word feud is the root word for taxation. In other words, if property is taxed, you are renting the land to the true owner. Pure and simple. You just go back. Feudalism versus allodialism. But guess what word has been removed from the dictionary? Not feudalism, allodialism. Yeah, you can't find it in modern dictionaries often. But Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter, interestingly, around the time of the Declaration. He said this: all land in the colonies is allodial. Not 1 inch is feudal. Now, the average person today would go, what's he talking about? Oh, man. When I read that quote, by the way, it was like research, time to footnote it. Oh, that's awesome. Jefferson knew it. They knew it. This was huge. See, here's the idea. The king owns everything. So here's what it does. Okay, I'm going to take all of you, throw you on a boat. You're going to go explore someplace. All right? So when you get to that place and you put a flag down in the name of the king, it doesn't matter what the people have named the land. You just rename it in the name of the king. You have naming rights. You rename the rivers. You rename everything. You rename everything. You don't take anything of what anyone else has, and you totally, you rule over them. In fact, the papal bull of 1452 said this: best way to convert people to Christianity, I'm just summarizing now, best way is to go steal their lands, make them slaves, and force them into conversion. And they sent out the wonderful Jesuits to follow that rule. How many would agree that's centralized, top-down, arrogance? And you had a mixture coming into America because not everybody did. And here's what the Pilgrims did. They said the following: we're going to agree. We can't claim land like Abraham. We can't just claim that this land is ours. So the Pilgrims systematically, for at least 4 to 8 years after they got there, initially they paid the natives with a property deed for every inch of ground that they went on. That's not in the textbooks. But I can take you to the Registry of Deeds in Plymouth, and I can show you a complete book, and you'll see one letter at the bottom, which is the chief's signature. When's the last time you heard that? And because they didn't claim it like this, they have to go for God's glory to bless others. These were their instructions. You must desire to evangelize the natives, not conquer the natives. You must be plenty of empty space. Don't go build your settlement on top of another village. They're there first. Don't do that. Procure a treaty of peace as soon as possible. and gain voluntary title to land by purchase. This is a document published in 1622 by Robert Cushman, who was a member of the Pilgrim Party. He went back with the Speedwell. He came the year later, but he's one of the Pilgrims. This was their instruction. You see, it's a completely different instruction than top down. It's amazing. But you know, interesting thing about history is, I listen to the television, I listen to some things, my wife knows, if I'm listening to someone who's talking on history and I realize they're just not, I pace around the room. I calm down. I don't, my wife said, anyone could see you publicly, you ruin your testimony. But anyway, the point is, I know that this is the case. The worst part about history is what people leave out. The other side, nobody talks about. Well, so what about religious liberty? The Pilgrim belief, religious belief is a voluntary choice. What does the conscience say? Conscience is the most of sacred property. That's words not in the Constitution, but that's the embedded principle in the Constitution. That's what James Madison said, the protection of one's conscience. The church should not dominate the state. Well, there's a separation of duties at state and federal level. This was in the Constitution. You see, the First Amendment did not make the separation of church and state. It made the separation of state and federal government. What are the first two words? Congress shall not make any law that violates the establishment of religion or the free exercise of where? In the states. So basically it was a stop sign. It said to Congress, keep your hands off the states. They can be as religious as they want. That's the meaning of the First Amendment. Go into the archives, read the results, read the debates. It's so clear. It's not that you don't have Christianity. The Christian pastors debated the First Amendment. I'm not going to debate away their liberty. That's not what it meant. So you and I have to realize this came from the Pilgrims, though. They separated the duties of pastor and civil government. The Pilgrims on the board of the Mayflower, when the Mayflower Compact was signed, it meant Christian and non-Christian. People who were outside the church, inside the church, both voted for the rule of law, and everybody followed the rule of law. Why was there a mutiny talk on the Mayflower? Because the people who were not part of the Leiden congregation thought the moment they landed, the Leiden church would dominate them, like the church dominated where? In England. And the civil law would come behind it. The shock that must have been on their foot. These guys just didn't sing psalms and talk about it. They actually do it when all of a sudden, here you go. Here's the quill pen. You sign the document, and then we all operate by the rule of law, not the rule of the pastor, not the rule of the church, not the rule of some party, the rule of law. You realize how radical that was in history? It's radical. And this is what the Constitution did. First Amendment protecting the states. Civil government is a divine institution, separate from the church. Pilgrims were ahead of their times with this. Because you see, in England, King James said he was the head of the church and the state. So what he did was the state dominated the church and forced the church to dominate the people. So what's the tendency? When you come to America, a lot of the Puritans, they flipped it around. Instead of the state dominating the church dominated the state. So what did the Puritans, some of them, have in Boston? You had to be a church member before you could vote. Who's ruling? The church. Because if the church keeps you from being a member, you can't vote. And we'd say that's crazy today. But the Pilgrims, that's not the way it was. You could vote because you were a citizen. Oh, that's radical. That's just unheard of. Now, if you go on, you have civil liberty, the oath to the rule of law. We're just leading into it. And this is the Mayflower Compact, as I just said. And John Robinson had written them a letter and said, hey, if you want to get peace along with people, renew your repentance with God. Provide peace with everyone. Don't take offense. You know, today, I was just reminded, I was thinking about this the other day. We've become an offensive sensitivity training culture. I'm waiting for you to offend me. And once you do, I have my piece of the pie. And I'm coming after you. What Robinson says is this: if you build a culture on offense, you're going to disintegrate. He said, how about not taking offense? Now, there's a thought. So even if someone wanted to offend you, you say, I don't take offense. I don't hold it against you. And that's what Robinson said. Otherwise, you'll disintegrate your own society. Fourth, you truly bend on the general good. What is best for everybody? I dare say there are actually politicians in our land today that don't vote for the general good. They vote for their good. What is best to keep them in power? See, a politician is one who works tirelessly to stay in power. A statesman stands for principle, and he'd rather lose than compromise his principle. Which do you think we have more of? I don't know. You don't have to answer that. This is a very astute group, okay? Lastly, whereas you to become a body politic, let your wisdom and godliness appear, he said. Don't be like the foolish multitude who more honor the gay coat than either the virtuous mind of the man with the glorious ordinance of the Lord. In other words, he said, foolish people vote for the way someone looks. They don't vote out of the fear of God, the ordinance of the Lord, and they don't vote because of the virtuous mind of the person. Robinson said, if you're going to vote in civil society, watch how that person has made decisions before they ever ran for office and want you to vote for them. Look at their record, not their rhetoric. That's my phrase. And therefore, you'll find out, look, if they voted 10 times to increase their personal budget and have gone bankrupt 6, what do you think they're going to do in civil government? Likely not to. I give you one little story. I brought some politicians in front of my class studying constitutional law. It's always dangerous to bring politicians in when the students have studied constitutional law. And they start asking questions. And the students catch on pretty quickly. Yeah, first of all, they're always intimidated by someone who's running for office. But the students over the years have learned, when one ninth grader said, I know more of the document than they do. They can't believe that, first of all. One of them said, when's the last time you read the document? I'm like, calm down, watch your attitude. Because they're like, they smell, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. And people will argue. I've had people who've said these things and said, oh my gosh, in fact, well, this person was saying, I'll do this for the people. One politician said, I'll do this for you. And if you tell your parents to vote for me, I'll do this. And the students just hand up and said, why do we want you to do that? Why don't we just do it ourselves? You mean you don't want all those things? And then the student goes off, it's just entitlements. That's not the right way for the Constitution. I had an experience one time where I had a student, this girl, I'll never forget her, and I always had to watch her when these things came in because she would rise up and it was like she became this barracuda shark. And I was like, it was scary because literally I had politicians come into my office with a cup. The coffee cup was like shaking. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is not good. But the point is, it's because we vote based on what someone's character is, what they have done in the past. I once had to ask one of the politicians, can I ask if you're personally in debt? I'm in the bad one. Oh my word. And he said, well, I'm offended by that. That has absolutely nothing to do with running for office. And then, of course, I'm sitting in the back, turning away because I don't want. I'm like thinking this has been a mistake. And then she follows it up. She goes, "No, sir, that's not true. What you are in private will be seen in public. It's only a matter of time." So I've had some interesting experiences with that. I had to apologize to a few politicians and get some kids in line, and it wasn't used. All right, so signing the Mayflower Compact. You see, in the name of God, we whose names underwritten the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign King, Lord King James. God to the people, and then out to government. You see that powerful? That's going to be repeated in the Declaration of Independence. We get our rights where? From where? God. And so the Pilgrims did something radical here when they're dealing with it. They arrived in a harbor, brought safe to land, fell upon the knees, blessed the God of heaven. And the Pilgrim Constitution. Now, most people say, well, the Mayflower Compact, that was an illegal document according to England. True. England ignored the Mayflower Compact. But the Pilgrims functioned by it. The England sent over a new compact 1 year later, which said, now you're listening. So Bradford took it, he put it in the drawer, but he functioned by the Mayflower Compact. You know, the Mayflower Compact was written as the preamble to every edition of laws that the Pilgrims published in the 1600s. Because it was the charter, like the Declaration of Independence, which defined the rights and where they came from. But they still needed a set of bylaws. Like we have the Constitution, first the Articles of Confederation, and then the Constitution. They had their Constitution. In 1636, their constitution was a charter. The Mayflower Compact was a charter. It was the bylaws, due process. The governor, the lieutenant governor's job description, due process of law, justice, punishment, the oaths of office, the oath of a freeman. You will submit to a good and wholesome. So in other words, your oath was to the rule of law. Your oath is not to the governor. Now, sometimes today we go, what's the difference? Oh, it's huge. See, today there's this implied understanding that if you're a Republican, you pledge ultimate loyalty to the Republican Party. If you're a Democrat, you're ultimately, and you can't veer from what the party says. No, we don't live in a land where you take an oath to a party. You take an oath to the law. You take an oath to the Constitution. That is so radically different. What do? Do you think in Venezuela they take an oath to the law? No, you are judged by how obedient you are to the dictator. That's all there is to it. You're not thinking, the rule of law means that this is the same for everybody. Remember the common law. So, and by the way, most people don't realize, the Pilgrims brought these ideas. They went into the colonial America. They seeped into the very soil. They began to be the way New England governed. Connecticut became the child of the Pilgrims. The bicameral legislature of a House and a Senate. First in Connecticut, 1639, Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. They birthed it. That's why it's called today the Constitution State. Because of that. And you recognize, and it was Noah Webster who came to Connecticut and studied the Connecticut Constitution, that wrote a letter, put it into a book called Sketches of American Policy, put it on Mount Vernon, where George Washington would get it, gave it to George Washington before the Constitutional Convention, and said this: let the government of Connecticut be the model for the United States of America. And who was it that broke the deadlock at the Constitutional Convention? Roger Sherman. And what state did he come from? Connecticut. And therefore, do you see that the ideas promulgated sprouted into it? Someone came to me and they said, oh, America was founded by a bunch of Jesuits, and they're getting their history and timing all mixed up. Yeah, Jesuits did try to come, founded by Jesuits. Let me tell you right now, if Jesuits ratified our Constitution, it would not look like the way it looked. Okay, how does a Jesuit take their religious ideas of top-down centralization and force and put them in a Constitution that would not look like the Constitution of the United States? The Constitution, bottom up, inside out, rule of law. Not going to get that from those ideologies. Now, you recognize this. So civil liberty, oath to the rule of law. The church doesn't rule, the law rules. That's constitutional supremacy. You know, in England, we had parliamentary supremacy. What does that mean? Whatever Parliament passes is supreme. See, in America, we don't have congressional supremacy. We do not have judicial supremacy. Well, it's functioning like it, but we're not supposed to have it. You don't have that. You have constitutional supremacy. Article 6, very clear. This Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It's not the Congress. So in other words, we're supposed to judge what Congress does by a higher standard than Congress. Now that's a radical thought today. We judge them by the Constitution. So do I have a right to say that law you just passed in Congress is not a true constitutional law? Yes. I laughed one time. Someone came to me and said, what do you think of this? I was in a question and answer period. What do you think of this certain law? I said, well, first of all, the law is unconstitutional, dead on arrival. Anyway, I said, why? I said, because it raised so many millions of dollars. I said, well, what's wrong with that? It started in the Senate. And they looked at me and said, well, what does that matter? Article 1, Section 8. You can't start any law. Where do you think Obamacare started? In the Senate. When was it passed? On a Sunday. So actually, before we even look at the content of the law, we can say procedurally it was unconstitutional. But the average American, would you agree, is not thinking that way. Okay? They're not thinking constitutionally. They came to me and said, well, we passed the United Nations. We're a member of the United Nations. So you have to understand, when the United Nations was voted in, they wanted to vote it in as a treaty. It should have been a treaty. I would have voted against it. But what I'm saying is, it was a treaty. But when they couldn't get the 2/3 votes, they turned it into a law. so they could get the UN treaty passed as a law with less than 2/3 required by the Constitution. Can you imagine people fudging it so that they can kind of make it constitutional? Well, back then, you had to fudge it because someone was going to say, hey, you didn't get the 2/3 votes. You know, and then a political party, then the Congress changes and says you need 60% when the Constitution says you need 51. Look, it's just crazy because we are not operating by the rule of law. Do you follow me? And that's going to be a problem. I'm not angry at every person that does that. I constantly repeat, God forgive them, help me to do so too. Most do not. Okay, I've been down to Washington. I meet with congressmen when I can. I remember sitting in this. They had a panel of pastors. I had a call from a friend. He said, "Hey, Paul, they want pastors to meet in Washington and ask legislators questions. Tell me the date. Can you get me in? I'll get you in." I got in there. I had a couple of questions, and they were asking questions on this law, on that law. I had my question in the back. I said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Let me ask you this question." I said, "I've been listening for 45 minutes to all of you congressmen," and these are conservative congressmen and women. All of you, I have never heard the C word yet. I said, "Should I spell it?" It's Constitution. And I'm not kidding you. One of the conservative congressmen said, "Oh, no. Listen, Pastor, we do operate that way. We have a policy that whenever a bill is constructed, you have to put the article and section of the Constitution on the bottom because you have to show that." I said, "Let me ask you this question. Does the bill have actually anything to do with the phrase that you put on the bottom?" "Well, no." Anyway, I called my wife. She said, "What'd you go down there for?" "Oh, to the Constitution, due process." These were built. Now, one more thing. We'll close, and we'll turn it over to questions. Economic liberty. It's usually the last thing that changes. You know, when the Pilgrims came here, the English system had degenerated so far that socialism was the norm. Now, socialism was not a word that was used. Communism was not a word that was used. This is what they called it communism was the word. Not communism, communism. In other words, the Puritans had adopted when they came over, because this is the way England did it. In England, they said the best way to get a town along together is to have a common field. And everybody's cattle grazes in the common field. It's not your field, it's not your field, it's not your field, it's all of our fields. But do you think that worked? No, you had neighbors at each other's throat. You know why? One neighbor would go to the other. "Your cattle is the fattest four-legged creature, eats more grass on that field. My cattle have nothing to eat. And my cow is starving because of your fat cow." This goes on. Look at the record books. I'm not kidding you. It's amazing because everybody owns everything. And it didn't work. It made everybody upset. Not only that, by the time the Puritans came, the government had this, think of this. Can you imagine a government that says you just all have to share regardless of how we each make? But here's the second thing the government had. The government established the just price. So the government put price controls on the economy. I know. What a shock. But the government put price controls on it. And not only that, the government set the wages for your vocation in a book. So, for instance, if I'm going to be a blacksmith in my town, I already know what I'm going to make. Not based on how good I am. Blacksmiths make this amount of money. I know you're with me. And this is the price ceiling you can charge as a blacksmith. And if you're a blacksmith, you look at it and say, "I have to pay my workers this amount, and I can't sell more than that amount, I'm going bankrupt." And that's why the biggest Puritan business that took off in clothing, the Saugus Iron Works, up near Saugus, it's a museum now, and it's a museum to the failure of socialism. You know, when I give a tour, I'm going to say something a little different than the other people who guides. But because, and this was the end result, big study was done on why the Saugus Works, Iron Works, we had the bogs, we had the natural iron, we had everything there. How come? It said this. The government would never allow them to charge the price that would have given them a profit to stay in business. This is what the Pilgrims inherited, a common system out of England. And so when they came, Here's what they did. They had to by their financial advisors. And you see, the profit motive was preached against by the Puritan preachers. It's a sin to make a profit. You should not make a profit. Their hearts were right. Theology was wrong. So now they're coming in and nobody wants to charge enough. But here's the point. The private investors that sent them on the Mayflower, that paid for it, they did not believe the Pilgrims should make a profit, but they believed they should. Because always the people who rule against profit are the ones making the profit. It's the same way everywhere. So here's what happened. They go in and the Pilgrims are about starving after 2.5 years trying this. And Bradford says, well, regardless of what they say, we're going to set every man his own farm in particular. You get the amount of land in proportion to your family. And then if you grow enough food to eat, you survive. And if you won't work, you won't eat. Oh, what a shock. And so the common field, the just price, the wage ceiling, those are the phrases used at the time period. Interestingly, Saugus Ironworks said, here's the data. In the massive data, shortage of operating capital, 2 factors, high cost of production, the ceiling price imposed by what? The general court. Prayer, key ingredient. They went to prayer. They changed the whole system. They went to a free market economy. They didn't call it that, but that's what it was. A free market economy, and then they had a drought. So they said, don't forget, if you can have the best system of economy, but if you get greedy and you spend it to yourself, you're in trouble. I'm teaching free market economics this whole year. So my class is going through a course on free market economics. I love teaching young people this because it rings a bell. When they go to work, I had one student the other day, he said, well, Dr. Jaley, I went to my boss and I started telling my boss what we're learning in class. I'm going, oh boy, this is interesting. You didn't tell him where you go to school. But the point is, listen, even if you're right, if you don't get rid of the greed, if your character is wrong, no system. And that's what they said. So economic liberty, individual enterprise, copyright laws in the Constitution, private charity, general welfare. That's the phrase for private charity in the Constitution. Unless it benefits all people, don't give it to some. The moment you give money to some people, you're making them privileges, and you're now doling out entitlement. Wampum was their currency. They created wampum, quahog shells, with the natives right over in the Uptuxet trading post there before you go over the bridge, you're born. Why? Why was that so powerful? It's powerful because there are 2 colors inside the quahog shell, the purple and the white. The purple was worth 3 times or so of the white. But you know what it did? It instantly made the natives wealthy. Because who could fish for quahogs better? The natives or the Pilgrims? The natives. They'd come in with piles of wampum, and the English were like, oh my word. But it was a win-win. So, I have the audacity to teach my students that the zero-sum fallacy is a fallacy. In other words, in the market today, you're taught, if you get rich, then somebody has to get poor. That's what's taught, okay? There's only a small amount of stuff. God never put enough stuff in the earth, so you have that stuff. The richer you get, the poorer I have to get. So if you get rich, I'm mad at you because your riches are keeping me poor. Whereas the free market, both sides win. It's a win-win all the time. So it's a winning. So it's a winning formula for economic liberty. Let me just tell you the result. The Pilgrims, the first year they went to free economy, farmed 3 times what they did the year before. The next year, 3 times more what they did. They went from 30 acres to 60 acres to 180 acres. And the rest of the Pilgrim, right up to the 1690s, they never had a famine or a shortage of food. And when anyone did without or didn't have enough, then they privately gave to them. I think we could learn from that. I actually think of a few outspoken public officials right now that could use this lesson. They probably wouldn't listen to me. But anyway, so this is the idea. So the Plymouth Colony, you can see it grows. Plymouth, Barnstable, Bristol counties, 18 villages, by 1690, 7,000 people. The 3rd generation of the Pilgrims, a legacy, all the things we talked about. So questions. What do you think? I mean, I can start being a fire hose and just plunge more in. But the point is, what do you think? First of all, did you know some of these things about the Pilgrims? No. Well, some of you did. But let me tell you, do you see why we're doing this?
Yeah.
American Pilgrim is 400. You know why? Because I can invite people and say, come on tours, hear what we're doing, learn about the Pilgrims for 5 days through drama, through music, through tours, and all the rest. And you will learn. And what we'll do is we'll just subtly teach, live stream it to the world.
Would you like me to play that now?
Let's do it.
We can ask questions.
Then we can do extra. Yeah. So here's what we put on our website. Here's what we're sending across the nation and international. We're bringing folks from the Netherlands. Why? We're bringing folks from England. That's where they came from. And it's going to be an international event. So he's going to just play this. This is what we're showing to people.
Okay, the browser won't support full screen.
Hello, I am Dr. Paul Jaley, Executive Director of the Plymouth Rock Foundation, which was begun in 1970 to preserve and propagate the history and heritage of the Pilgrims. Who were the Pilgrims? Why did they sail to these shores almost 400 years ago? What motivated them to sacrifice their lands, their families, and even their lives for such a venture? And when they had the chance, why did not one pilgrim return to England the next spring? In the year 2020, the American pilgrimage turns 400. In other words, it will have been 4 centuries since a small remnant church plant crossed the ocean and landed on the shores of New England. During the Great Reformation, occurring in England in the late 16th century, Bradford writes, by the travail and diligence of some godly and zealous preachers, many became enlightened by the word of God, and had their ignorance and sins discovered unto them. These new believers were, as Bradford says, scoffed and scorned by the profane multitude. And he goes on and says, they were ones whose hearts the Lord had touched with heavenly zeal for his truth. They shook off this yoke of anti-Christian bondage, and as the Lord's free people, joined themselves by a covenant of the Lord into a church estate, in the fellowship of the gospel, to walk in all his ways, made known or to be made known unto them, according to their best endeavors, whatsoever it should cost them. You see, these pilgrims were initially called separatists because they removed themselves from the state church and formed an underground. It was their faith in God, rooted in the scriptures, that brought them here. They were willing to sacrifice all they had and even their lives, whatsoever it should cost them. They crossed the Atlantic, formed a colony, endeavoring to walk in all God's ways as they saw it in the scriptures. The 4 centuries have now passed, and their legacy lives on. The most important treasure brought on the Mayflower were the ideas of self-government and liberty of conscience drawn from the pages of the Bible. So we are calling all Americans back to Plymouth, Massachusetts, June 28th through July 2nd, 2020, for the American Pilgrimage 400. It is an event conducted in Plymouth in cooperation with Plymouth 400 and its other signature events. But you will not want to miss any activity during this week. Beginning with the opening rally at the National Monument to the Forefathers, we will retell the story of how a band of freedom-loving families committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ braved an ocean, as Bradford says, stepping stones unto others and future generations. Through drama, music, inspiring speakers, historic tours, activities for all ages, we will hear from Wampanoag and Pilgrim ancestors. We'll hear from a delegation from the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, as well as dignitaries, state and town leaders from America's hometown, Plymouth, Massachusetts. Consider investing $40 as an individual toward this event. As a church or ministry, invest $400 if you're able. Let us unite and encourage one another from this snapshot in history that a nation planted by the seeds of the gospel through a church plant can bring forth the fruit of religious and civil liberty. We hope to see you there in June to July. Because you guys won't have to book hotel rooms.
Yeah.
We can rent out rooms.
Questions, comments, thoughts? What do you think? What did you learn? What stands out?
Well, I'll speak.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just remarkable to me, and it's not a surprise, and I knew some of this before, but to see side by side the